Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. You are listening and watching Rashkin Report in English. My name is Yuri Rashkin. I am the host of this channel, and I am glad that you're here with us. I am also thrilled to have with us former commanding general of U.S. Army in Europe, retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, fresh off of his appearance on Meet the Press or Face the Nation, pardon me. But Mr. Hodges, we will give you more time than they allotted for your appearance. I could not believe that 7 minutes was all you had. I thought I wanted to hear a lot more. So thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for the privilege, Yuri. I always enjoy coming on your program.
Thank you. You're one of the most respected military voices in Ukraine and beyond. And so our questions today will zero in on two areas. First of all, we have to talk about Ukraine and what's going on over there. But at the same time, me as citizen of the United States, I really would like to get some answers to some questions about what's going on right here from somebody who has a lot of military experience, and I can't think of a better person. So those are my two areas of interest for today. Let's begin with Ukraine, though, because I was a little surprised, to tell you the truth, to see how panicked Putin was. This whole idea of no, giving Ukraine tomahawks will hurt our relations doesn't he know that Trump likes to bluff?
I think that what we're seeing is a growing recognition on both sides of this conflict, of this war, that Russia is in trouble, that Putin is in trouble. He can see it, even if he can't acknowledge it publicly. With all the advantages and after all this time and all these casualties, they really don't have much to show for it. On the other hand, Ukraine has, of course, figured out and has developed a capability to punish Russia's oil and gas infrastructure. And that is making a significant difference in Russia's ability to continue to pay for this war. And so I think the president of the United States saw that, and which is why maybe a few weeks ago he did what I would describe as an abrupt turn in his assessment of what he thinks is happening. And when he said that, Russia's a paper tiger, Ukraine can win this war, and the EU should help them reclaim all of their territory. That was remarkable.
That was remarkable. And how do you explain it just based on the fact that there's new information that Ukraine seems to be in better position because judging by their oil refineries being on fire, that seems like a good thing. Is that where you ascribe the weakened position of Putin, or where do you see that weakness coming from?
Well, of course, that certainly would be the thing that is most visibly happening that everybody can look at. But if you're the president of the United States, you've got access to all sorts of information. So he would have economists telling him what the impact is on global oil markets if Russia is being damaged that much. And I think there also is, as you would probably know, there's kind of a lag between the reality on the ground and then the realizations about what's actually happening as far away as in DC or Berlin or London or places like that. So I think you and I have talked before for a while. I've always been optimistic about Ukraine, especially if the West would help Ukraine. Now it feels like the Ukrainians have changed the dynamic on the battlefield with not only the support they've gotten from the European partners, but also they've grown their own defense industry to the point that almost 40% of the ammunition they use is produced by Ukraine. Their long-range precision strike capability, that's what's being used to inflict all this damage on Russia's oil and gas infrastructure. So all of these things create a change dynamic on the ground that affects Russian forces, Ukrainian forces, and the perception from the outside. And it seems that it's been enough to penetrate the false narrative that the administration was using in the preceding several months.
Would you call this a collapse of Putin's deterrent narrative?
No, collapse is a pretty strong word, and as much as I would like to see that, I don't think we're in a place where that would be the right description. The Russians still have enormous amounts of capabilities, and President Putin has not given any indication that he's prepared to stop this war as long as he thinks he can win, which means as long as he thinks that the West is going to quit or give up, or that he can count on the U.S. not being an active supporter. So for now, I think what we're seeing today is going to continue on into next year, unless there is some significant external dynamic that changes all that, such as a huge Russian force appears out of nowhere that's properly equipped and trained that could change things on the battlefield. I don't see that happening. Or on the other side,
be a giant Chinese force.
Well, now that's a good point. The Chinese are being much more, I think, brazen in their support for Russia, but Chinese troops, that's a different story. This relationship, and I think you probably know this better than I do, but my assessment is that the relationship between China and Russia, clearly China is the big brother, Russia is the junior partner there. China, I think over the centuries, there's no love there between Russia and China. But for now, China loves getting cheap Russian oil and gas. But I'm not sure that they're prepared to put their own troops into the fight. They're happy to see the West, focused on that and not, which gives China a little bit more flexibility of its own. But to do something as significant as adding their own boots on the ground, that would be something. Now, you could make an argument if you're the head of the PLA army, your troops have no combat experience. You have a gigantic army, but they have no combat experience. So maybe, so I could imagine them wanting to have some get on the ground there. But maybe I'm wrong. That doesn't seem likely to me.
So that large army that will not appear out of nowhere is also not going to be Chinese.
I don't think so. There may be more North Koreans coming, but I don't know that.
So do you think that at this point Russia is likely to go to a real confrontation with NATO following end of war in Ukraine? Because Boris Pistorius said that it is not very likely, although German intelligence suggests that perhaps there is such possibility. How do you assess Russia's ability to wage such a conflict? Is this more of a show because Russia can't, or Russia has no other way but to wage wars?
So right now, it seems to me that Russia has a two-pronged strategy. Number one is, of course, focused on Ukraine and causing as much destruction as they can to the parts of Ukraine that they're not able to conquer. So that's going to continue for as long as they can do that. The other prong is focused on NATO Europe and but in the gray zone operations type of things, what we're all watching with the drones, the operations violating Estonian airspace, the Shadow Fleet vessels, sabotage, all these things that they're doing. And of course, that's intended to destabilize European countries, to create some sort of panic so that people would put pressure on their government to stop supporting Ukraine. We don't want to feel the wrath of Russia, so stop supporting Ukraine. Now, to me, this is a precursor. These are the kind of things Russia would be doing if they did intend to ever attack a NATO country. I was just reading a report earlier today about a lot of communications antenna masts along Sweden's coastline were destroyed here very recently, and to a scale something more than just a couple of knuckleheads out there. Um, I don't foresee Russia attacking NATO in a traditional sense uh, before they have finished Ukraine. Now, so that means that if Ukraine does not fail, that they continue to stop Russia, then I don't think Russia will have the ability to open up a new front where then you have all of NATO actually getting involved. Ukraine only fails if the West allows it to fail. If we completely turn our back and we abandon them, say, hey, bad luck for you, then that would mean also that the Kremlin would be looking at the West as being weak, uh, not having the political will to do what was necessary, and that's a different situation. And I could imagine them being emboldened, especially after they absorbed tens of thousands of trained and equipped Ukrainian soldiers into the Red Army, millions more Ukrainian refugees on the road into Europe, causing more instability. So those are the kind of things I think that would have to happen before a widening of the war with NATO.
So Europe can't let Ukraine fail.
That's the best way to prevent war with NATO, with the European part of NATO, is by making sure that Ukraine defeats Russia. Then you don't have to see a single German, French, or British soldier in combat if that happens.
But at the same time, what should be the appropriate response from NATO to all of these provocations? Just greater support of Ukraine or more?
No, these are two different things here. So the support for Ukraine, of course, is what will ultimately lead to the defeat of Russia. And that would mean, in addition to the kind of things that are being provided now, the provision of more long-range precision strike capability that can continue to hit Russian logistics and Russian headquarters, and especially Russian oil and gas infrastructure, either by providing capabilities or investing in Ukraine's ability to produce these things to get them to greater scale. The other thing that European countries should be doing, of course, and this goes to your question about stopping these gray zone operations, is why are we not seizing the shadow fleet vessels that sail out through the Baltic Sea? There's some people are uneasy about it. Well, they're international waters, but even under the Copenhagen Treaty of 1857, the nations have some authorities for their own security and safety to stop vessels. The European Commission's special envoy for sanctions, Mr. O'Sullivan, said that all of these ships are end-of-life vessels. I mean, they are floating environmental disaster time bombs waiting to wreck on somebody's shore and leak oil all over the Baltic coastlines of European countries. So get out there, stop them, inspect for safety compliance, for environmental soundness. Let me see your insurance papers. Things that our police do all the time with drivers to make sure that they're not drunk driving or that they have their seatbelt fastened. That's exactly what we should be doing in the Baltic. So European countries could do that. The Kremlin will raise hell about it, of course. There'll be some sort of retribution, but I think we need to steel our nerves and do these things. Otherwise, it's only going to continue. With drones, every time a drone flies over Munich airport or Copenhagen airport and shuts down the airport, that's millions of euro of lost economic impact that comes through these airports. And it also is a giant middle finger from the Kremlin to Europe saying, we can decide when you can come and go. And so the technology is there. My goodness, we can track a meteor thousands of miles out in space. We ought to be able to figure out where a drone comes from out in the Baltic Sea somewhere.
Well, and that's where it seems like maybe this is not so much about a question of do we know where this came from, or are we willing to admit where it came from? And on that level, at least stopping seizing the ships seems like a good place to start.
Yeah. I spoke to a Danish gentleman last night at an event here in Frankfurt, and I had mentioned in my little presentation that that the Danish prime minister, she is very tough. I mean, she's She's not confused about who the bad guys are. But even she stopped short of saying it's the Russians that are launching these drones that are causing all the problems in Denmark. And he told me, he said that the Danish media is very tough on her for being provocative, for saying things that might upset the Russians. So that's just one report, but it's also very believable. And so our political leaders should be working together and have the confidence to say what needs to be said. You know, the Russians are at war with us, even if we don't think we're at war with them. And until we have the sense of urgency to do what needs to be done to inflict consequences on Russia for their illegal gray zone operations, it's only going to continue to get worse. So if we want to prevent an actual kinetic conflict, we have to inflict consequences now.
Going back to weapons and what Ukraine may need, considering that this administration is not going to help Ukraine without getting something back, period. We just saw over $3 billion of aid that expired at the end of September, but because it was unused. But what would you suggest for Ukraine? Of what weapons is needed that was produced by European countries, what weapons of U.S. should Europeans buy for Ukraine?
So based on what I hear from Ukrainians and just watching myself, it looks to me that there's two capabilities that they really need that would be at the top of the list in my assessment. Number one, of course, is the capability to protect their citizens, the innocent civilians, and their infrastructure from these nightly drone and missile attacks, you know, hundreds almost every night. So you're talking about the ability to knock down drones, to knock down cruise missiles, to knock down all the different things the Russians are throwing at Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. So that's the first one. The second one is on the offensive side, the long-range precision strike capability that can reach out all the way to hit Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, particularly the part that's used for exporting oil to India and China and Turkey. I mean, it's good that the refineries are being hit and that Russian citizens are feeling the price or feeling the pain of gasoline shortages all over Russia. And so you and I'm sure all of your listeners have seen the pictures and videos of these long gas lines in different places around the Russian Federation because they don't have gas. But the ones that are really significant are when you can hit the oil and gas export part of the industry. So providing weapons that can hit with precision and that can get past various air defenses and can hit the right place in a refinery, that's the capability that I think would make a significant difference for Ukraine.
That is fascinating. So it seems like Ukraine has found a weak spot, and so you're just suggesting help them hit the weak spot.
Over and over and over. You know, if you only hit a refinery one time, it'll get repaired and be back in business in a few weeks. So every one of these that's been hit, you have to reattack and make sure that they don't get it back into operation. Now, part of this, and again, you know this better than me, but as I look as an amateur historian and I look at Russian history, one of Russia's great strengths has always been its vastness. I mean, just the size. And so you always hear about invading armies just eventually being overextended, swallowed up into Russia until the Tsar's forces would come back and then destroy them. The most two obvious being Napoleon and Hitler. That strength, though, now in modern warfare appears to be a vulnerability because Ukraine now has the ability to reach such distances and hit targets with precision. Russia is not able to protect all of them because of that vastness. They don't have enough air and missile defense to protect every refinery plus all the other places that need to be protected. So there is this kind of a game is not the right word, but there is a sort of a chess match going on with the Russians trying to anticipate where's the next Ukrainian attack coming from. And so they're moving around radar, ground-based defense, etc. And then the Ukrainians are watching where that's happening and trying to pick a target where they can avoid Russian air defense, because there's just not enough. And I think in this case, because Ukraine's defense industry now is producing weapons that can reach that far, this is a real problem for the Kremlin.
Do you see as a goal of such a, if not game, then strategy to make Muscovites uncomfortable in winter?
Well,
Do you see a connection there as far as the cold and Moscow putting it together?
I would be surprised if that hadn't been discussed in some detail in Kyiv, because they've had to endure this for the last 3 winters, I think. So I'm sure that they would like to be able to do that. But I don't know enough about the oil and gas industry to know where does heating oil come from versus the oil that's used for export versus what oil that's refined into gasoline for cars. That would be some pretty sophisticated targeting. I can't imagine that there's no impact on it, but I would also imagine that Russia probably uses a lot of coal for its power plants to keep lights on as well. So, that would be a bonus if they were able to help bring the war home to Russians, so that Russian people would put pressure on their own government. But I don't know that that's a deliberate target.
That's interesting, because those that say that the way to end the war is to hit Moscow, but you are still concentrating on refineries, because that's going to end Russia's ability to export and therefore to generate money to pay for the war?
Exactly. I mean, I don't know what strategic value would come from launching attacks against Moscow. I think the Ukrainians have been very smart to focus on targets that contribute directly to their objectives. And so headquarters, ammunition factories, drone factories, and the oil and gas infrastructure. Without that, I mean, if Russia cannot export oil and gas to China, I mean, then the Chinese are probably less interested in helping them out. Certainly, they have to be able to export oil and gas to get the income that they need, the revenues that they need to keep the war going. And I think this is a real problem. I read an excellent report by Phillips O'Brien, who I'm sure you and many of your listeners may know who that Phillips is, about how the Ukrainians are going after that oil and gas infrastructure. And it looks like now that the Russians have lost close to 40% of their capacity. Now, some of that could be rebuilt if it's not reattacked, but wow, I mean, almost 40% of their refining capacity is out of action right now. That's incredible.
Well, in that case, to wrap up the conversation about Ukraine, is there a point in angling for and working, I don't know, demanding, asking for Tomahawks once again? Because is this something that's going to be crucial in hitting refineries in a different way, because there's only so much drone can do? Or do you see Tomahawk being used differently? And again, Putin, he see this as a personal threat or a threat to his regime? Just to kind of summarize it.
Yeah, well, of course, Tomahawk is a perfect example of a very effective long-range precision strike capability. I don't like to talk about specific weapons or names of weapons, because for me, the most important thing is the capability. But Tomahawk does have that capability and range, and it can carry a serious warhead that could wreck even faster that oil and gas infrastructure. You have to figure out how they're going to fire them. I mean, some people said, well, Tomahawk has to be launched from a submarine. Give me a break. The Ukrainians will figure that they can launch it off the back of a pickup truck. They've already demonstrated that. So
you sound like a Ukrainian.
Well, we continue to underestimate their ability to do things, and people forget that Ukraine was the defense industry heart of the Soviet Union. I mean, so they've got skills. I think that there's the president said when he was asked yesterday or day before, Mr. President, have you made a decision to give Tomahawk to Ukraine? And he said, yes, sort of. Like, what? Sort of. He said, I need to know where they're going to go. Well, I'll tell you where they're going to go. They're going to go straight for Russian oil and gas infrastructure or Russian ammunition factories. I mean, that's the capability that Ukraine could really use.
Well, that sums it up right there, and I appreciate your pro-Ukrainian point of view, because I feel like I am in Ukrainian media explaining that submarine is needed, and there's Ben Hodges saying, "Nah, they can do it off the back of a pickup truck," which is probably true if you ask a Ukrainian. I think it's great.
They'll figure it out.
They'll figure it out. There are no unsolvable problems. But speaking of unsolvable problems, United States. Well, there's several questions. I guess I'll start with one that Margaret Brennan didn't quite give you time to finish, but I would like to hear your full answer. The president, she said, president who also spoke at that gathering referred to enemy within, using cities like Chicago, down the street from me here in Wisconsin, as training grounds. Are you comfortable with people thinking that?
I think it's a terrible idea. And I can't speak for all those hundreds of admirals and generals and senior sergeants that were in that room, but I would imagine almost all of them would have been very uncomfortable with the idea of U.S. military being used against U.S. citizens. I've had this copy of the Constitution for the last more than 20 years, almost 30 years now. We say the oath to the Constitution over and over and over, and so that would have been in the fiber of every one of those men and women in that room, and which means you do things within a legal framework. And the idea that U.S. military would be used against American citizens in a scenario that doesn't seem to meet the criteria for Insurrection Act, for example, or that it's appropriate use. And so I'm very concerned. And there's a lot of pressure probably on the Joint Chiefs and other leaders that they're going to have to they're going to figure out how do they push back on this. And of course, the Congress has a role. I mean, where is the Congress on this? It's unbelievable that the Republican leadership in the Congress is, kind of standing by, it seems like. People who know much better.
It's like they're throwing Army under the bus.
That's what it looks like. Now, there was a reason that the administration got rid of all the senior judge advocates general, the Army, Navy, Air Force lawyers. The top ones all got sent off several months ago. And then other lawyers at different levels, military lawyers, are being sent off to help Homeland Security do court cases on the borders and stuff like that. Commander's commander. You're responsible for whether or not you accomplish your mission, or if you fail, you own it. But there's a reason that we always had a judge advocate general or a staff judge advocate to help you wrestle with legal questions. Targeting, is this a valid target? Or things that are more mundane, such as big contracts. And I can imagine everybody in that room was thinking like, boy, when I get back to my base or my ship, I need to talk to my staff judge advocate and ask them, is there any legal way that we could be deployed to do this? I would want to, that's what I would be doing. I would be take me through the legal justifications that you think we're hearing from the Department of Defense on how they would explain this. Because if I'm going to push back, as it is my duty to not obey an unlawful order, I better be correct that it is unlawful. So I'm guessing that all of them went back to their staff judge advocate after that.
To see what is going to be, how they can tell the difference between what's lawful and what's not lawful?
Yeah, because, things like shoot those prisoners, okay, that's so obviously unlawful. I mean, you don't need an Army lawyer to tell you that. But when the administration creates a scenario that where they think they can justify using military force against an American in an American city, so it will be uh, represented in such a way that's like, okay, is Portland really a war ravaged city? Is Chicago a war zone? Do you need U.S. military to protect government facilities, government property, which has been used before, or to protect ICE agents as they do their duty? I mean, these seem like really manufactured scenarios to justify using military force. And I think I know exactly how I feel about it. I've tried to be clear about that, but I imagine most of the women and men in that room feel very uneasy about this, and they're hoping like hell that that order never comes down to them.
Well, I think that's one of the things that is such a realization for a lot of people who think that they can sit this one out, and it's impossible. There's
Yeah,
no.
that's a great way to say it. You can't sit it out. Um, but I was impressed, when I looked at the video and the pictures of those hundreds of generals, admirals, and senior non-commissioned officers there. Um, they were comporting themselves exactly as they should: respectful, professional, and quiet. Uh, just like when you watch the State of the Union message, when the president's speaking up there, and you've got Republicans will stand up and cheer, or the Democrats will stand up and cheer, depending on what was said in the State of the Union message. And the camera would always show the Supreme Court justices and the Joint Chiefs, and they're all just sitting there like Mount Rushmore, with their hands in their lap, showing that they are apolitical. They're institutions that are apolitical, not partisan one way or the other. And I think that's important. And American people take confidence in knowing that their military is not going to be used or should not be used as a political device, and also our allies respect that, and so that's what's in danger right now.
Look, I think that there's a couple of things, because I think that when somebody who likes to perform in public, like our president does, doesn't get the applause that he's used to, accustomed to receiving, I think it makes everybody in that audience an enemy within. And I think that's just my impression of observing that performer. But that brings me to a question of military as an institute. Is there a possibility that this president will accept army to military to acquiesce to his desire to hold on to power as one option? Or is there a possibility that military as an institute will say, this was shameful, this was despicable, this is not the way you treat military leaders who have a lot more dust on their shoes than Secretary Hegseth, and on and on and on. I think it was a very demeaning meeting for people who have done as much for national security of this country as everybody in that room except for the speakers have. Is there a chance, a possibility that this will lead to, the United States is not known for military coups. That's not kind of how we do things.
No.
But how much can people get upset, or will they just resign? Because we see that too.
Yeah, I think, first of all, again, I mentioned the Congress. They have a responsibility here to, as a separate, equal branch of our government, to say this is unacceptable and to protect the military. So, where are the leaders from the Senate and House Armed Services Committees? Where are they? They know better than this. People like Lindsey Graham, who was a Air Force JAG officer himself, he knows what this is about. Where are they? So they should be speaking out. I don't expect it, but they should be. Where are the retired 4-stars? I have been very disappointed that retired 4-star generals and admirals are not speaking up. Now, they all have their own reasons. I've spoken with several of them. Some believe it's inappropriate for even retired flag officers to get involved. I have a different view. But for whatever reason, there's very, very few that have actually spoken out about this. Admiral Stavridis, General McCaffrey, General Clark, not many others that I can think of. General McChrystal has.
General Hertling.
Yeah, of course, Mark is a 3-star. I'm talking about the 4-star. Yeah,
apologies.
General Hertling and I've known him for many years. I have huge respect for. He is a very good writer and speaker. So that what he's doing is what should be happening with the guys, the retired 4-stars that we used to work for whom we used to work. That would provide protection for the 4-stars that are on active duty. That because they can't. You don't want to have people in uniform publicly coming out and saying, no way, we're not doing this. And that's because we also are trained and educated to respect civilian leadership over the military. So you don't want to have the uniforms publicly out there disparaging the civilian leadership, no matter how bad the policy might be. If it's illegal, though, this is where the uniforms should be pushing back on the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Army, Navy, et cetera, saying, Secretary, this is illegal. We can't do this. It's inappropriate to use military force. And then at some point, if it's a lawful order, you're obligated to carry it out. If it's unlawful order and they're still telling you to do it, then your choice is to refuse the order, and you probably end up having to resign.
If, in conclusion, somebody is listening to you who may be part of that room, or somebody who is looking, like you said, will be looking for JAG advice, instructions, maybe they're not there. What would you tell people that have questions on this issue?
Well, there are. What I would tell people that are listening is, first of all, please put pressure on your congressman and your senator to say that this is a very dangerous step that we're taking. The military has for decades been one of the most respected institutions in America because of this, the Constitution, and how strictly we do things to ensure we live up to our oath to the Constitution versus a personal loyalty to the president or to a governor or to the Congress or whatever. And so I think that sort of encouragement is important. The second thing I would do is encourage the retiree community to speak out, not just the 4-stars, but if you know any retirees that are out there, get them to speak out. Now, there is a pretty active group of retired 1, 2, and 3-stars, national security leaders, national security leaders for democracy that are out there. But the real heavyweights, these are the guys that need to speak up.
Former Commanding General of U.S. Army in Europe, retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, thank you so much to you for your time and for speaking out. It's incredibly important these days in particular. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the privilege, Yuri.